you don't make men safe by making them weak. In fact, they're much more dangerous when they're weak because they'll stab you in the back when they get the chance, or take advantage of you when they get the chance. You make men safe, let's say, by making them strong, and then by making sure that they're disciplined. And so, you've got people like you have got this, let's say, warrior mentality that's a deep part of their temperament, and then you have some choices about what you might do with that. You might try to discipline it and bring it under voluntary control and integrate it into your character, in which then it can make you someone who's stalwart and indomitable, and who will move forward, in the face of tremendous risk. And well, that's the optimal pathway if you have that kind of temperament. I think it's the men that have the most, what would you call it? It's not aggressive exactly, but we'll leave it at that. Aggressive and fearless temperaments that can be the best men, but it's like having a very powerful dog. You better discipline it, because otherwise it's going to be a monster.
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a commando. Like, I don't really remember wanting to do anything else. When I realized that there was that role that you could play in life, that's what I wanted to do. And a lot of my friends in the SEAL teams were the same way. That's what they wanted to do. As soon as they figured out, like, oh, that exists? Oh, I can do that? And I just have to sign this piece of paper and go do this stuff, and then that's what I'll be? Where does that come from?
Well, that's a very good question. I would say it's temperamental. People differ tremendously in their temperaments, and to think that there's a warrior temperament is a perfectly reasonable thing to think. There's been whole cultures, many cultures, who are devoted to fostering that warrior mentality, where if you weren't like that, you were the outlier. I would say that's probably true of most human cultures across most of time. We've been fortunate enough to live in relatively peaceful times, at least the vast majority of us, so the necessity for that, like right at the edges of actual warfare, is much less than it might be under other historical circumstances. But it's a deep part of many people's nature. And so the question is, what do you do with that? Right, and one alternative potentially is criminal behavior. The fact that so many people like watching movies about bad guys, is an indication of how attractive that is to people. And I think the reason for that is that, well, Nietzsche observed at one point that most of what people regard as morality is just cowardice. And what he meant by that was that people don't do bad things not because they're good, but because they're afraid to do the bad things. And then when they see people do the bad things, they're actually really deeply attracted by that, because it speaks to part of them that could go beyond the rules. And that's actually a necessary part. It's a really necessary part. Like, you don't make men safe by making them weak. In fact, they're much more dangerous when they're weak, because they'll stab you in the back when they get the chance, or take advantage of you when they get the chance. You make men safe, let's say, by making them strong, and then by making sure that they're disciplined. And so, you've got people like you have got this, let's say, warrior mentality that's a deep part of their temperament, and then you have some choices about what you might do with that. You might try to discipline it and bring it under voluntary control and integrate it into your character, in which then it can make you someone who's stalwart and indomitable, and who will move forward, in the face of tremendous risk. And well, that's the optimal pathway if you have that kind of temperament. I think, like, it's the men that have the most, what would you call it? It's not aggressive exactly, but we'll leave it at that. Aggressive and fearless temperaments that can be the best men. But it's like having a very powerful dog. You better discipline it, because otherwise it's going to be a monster.
Well, I was a rebellious kid, right? And I could have easily gone down the path of crime. And as a matter of fact, when we were kids or younger, everyone kind of had the same thing. But like you said, I'm so lucky because I just signed that piece of paper and I saw that I could do something and I could take all that aggression and all that energy, I could do something that was good and positive. And we joke about that for the SEAL teams that many guys, you actually, to be a good SEAL, you sort of have this criminal mindset that you've somehow harnessed and you keep under control most of the time. Yeah. And occasionally it does get out of hand, and we've got guys that get in trouble, and that happens. And if we only took guys that would never get in trouble, we wouldn't have anyone in the ranks.
Well, you also see too in the classic hero stories. I mean, you see this with Harry Potter, for example, which I'm making reference to because it was such a phenomenon. I mean, when something makes welfare mother richer than the Queen of England, you shouldn't take note, right? And when kids are reading 500-page books and standing in line waiting for the next one, and when you produce a whole movie empire around something, you should take note of that. Well, Harry Potter's little team aren't the delinquents, right, who have no discipline, but they're also not the good kids. They're the kids who will break rules when necessary, and that's the issue. Break rules when necessary. Now the question is, when is that necessary? Well, that's sort of the ultimate ethical choice. But you know, why did that work for you, do you think? Why was it? Well, two questions. One would be, why did you decide to step into a disciplined structure? I mean, that's obviously very difficult. And why do you think you did that and some of the other kids that you knew that were like you didn't?
It was really one of the most rebellious things that I could do was to join the military. So I come from a small New England town. People get done with high school, they go to college, they get a job as whatever people get jobs as. They follow that very normal path. And I didn't even know anyone that joined the military. And so that was the most rebellious thing I could do. Oh, college? No. Education? No. I'm going to go be a commando. That's what I'm going to do. And it was the most rebellious thing I could do. I think that's one of the reasons why I did it. It was also a complete breakaway from, family. Oh, okay, I will have no reliance on you. I'm going, you don't have to worry about me anymore. I'm done. I will not rely on anyone else. I will be self-reliant, which I wanted to do. And so I think those are the main things that got me there. And then what's great about it for me was when I got there, you have a completely blank slate, and you have very clear directions of what you need to do to ascend the dominance hierarchy. You do this, you follow these rules, you literally fold your underwear in this way when you're going through boot camp, and you get a better grade on your military performance. So they give you very clear rules that you're supposed to follow and very clear tasks that you have to do. And it was great for me because it was a blank slate, because when I was in high school, I was a screw up. Not bad, but not good. And so I hadn't really set myself up properly. And now all of a sudden, all I had to do, that was all gone. It didn't matter. The past did not matter at all. I had a completely blank slate. If you do this stuff properly, you'll do well, and you'll ascend that.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting thing, because then it's not merely a matter of following a set of arbitrary rules. It's following a set of rules that have a clear path to success. Right? That's a very different thing, and that's also something that's honest, because the rules of the game are well established, and then if you play it properly, you get to win. And that's a big deal as well. And you mentioned the SEAL types, and I've met a number of people like that. They're capable of breaking rules, let's say, or maybe even inclined to break them. But I also think that this is part of the reason that I'm an admirer of Carl Jung, because Jung makes it very clear that he was very interested in the barriers to enlightenment. Because if there's such a thing as being enlightened, let's say, then why isn't everyone enlightened? If it's just a matter of taking the glorious route and following your bliss, let's say, it's like, well, that sounds pretty easy. Why isn't everyone enlightened? But Jung's thinking isn't like that at all. He believed that in order to transform your personality had to be disciplined, that's for sure. But you also had to integrate that part of you that was terrible and capable of breaking rules and make it part of you. And so say, there was a newspaper headline in one of Canada's major newspapers, and it was the Minister of Foreign Affairs at that time, Lloyd Axworthy, and he was talking about what had happened with Milosevic in the former Soviet Union in Yugoslavia, and the atrocities that were being committed. And he said that he was caught unawares by that because he didn't have the imagination for that kind of evil. And I thought, well, you think that what you're doing is signaling your virtue by making a statement like that, but from my perspective, all you're doing is stating your cowardice and your historical ignorance, because if you're going to be Minister of Foreign Affairs, you bloody well better have imagination for that kind of evil, because if you don't, then anyone who does wins. They beat you. And so, again, the Harry Potter stories, you see, he's touched by evil, but he actually has a soul fragment that's embedded within him that's as black as anything can possibly be. That's why he could talk to snakes. But without that, he wouldn't be able to have any victory. And that's exactly right psychologically. Unless you can think the way that an evil person thinks, then you're defenseless against them, because they'll go places you can't imagine, and then they win. And so the best man I've met, it was interesting, even when I was in junior high and high school, because most of my friends dropped out, by the time they were grade 10, thereabouts. And a lot of them were guys who developed physically. They're pretty powerful, and they're just damn sick of putting up their hand to go to the bathroom. It's like, they're not doing that anymore. One of my friends got kicked out when he sort of challenged the gym teacher, physically. And the gym teacher, he could do an iron cross. He was a tough guy, and so it was no trivial matter for my friend to stand up to him, but he got expelled anyways. But, I noticed that it was often the kids whose character I admired that either quit or got expelled, and they were the tougher guys who were just sick and tired of following rules that didn't take into account their character, and then they'd go off and work in oil rigs or whatever, and you could do that in Alberta at that time. That was really hard work, so it wasn't like they were necessarily taking the easy path. But like, a harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very, very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. And you also see that like one of the central female stories, let's say, if the hero archetype is the central male story, there are variants of hero archetypes that are relevant to women, and one of them is Beauty and the Beast. And Beauty isn't interested in the guy who isn't the Beast. She's interested in the guy who's the Beast, and that's exactly right, but she's interested in the guy who's the Beast that can be civilized and disciplined, right, and who can use that in the service, well, let's say, of a family. And that's exactly how it should be.
So I gave a speech, one of my very good friends got married a few years ago, and I gave a speech. And at this speech, he was a friend of mine, SEAL, and at this speech, I was talking about what it was to be a man, and when I felt like I was a man. And I said there was three things that I felt let me transition from being, mentally insecure about who I was as a person to being, okay, I'm actually good with who I am. Number one was learning how to fight. And, I got into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, and I learned how to fight. And now, all of a sudden, when I looked at other people, I wasn't posturing, I wasn't trying to pretend that I was tough. I knew that most people that I would encounter, I could defeat in a physical altercation. That was number one. Number two was going into combat. Because even though you might be tough in a street fight or in a fist fight with someone, when you're facing death, well, that's a whole nother level. And for me, going into combat, well, what was I going to act like? Was I going to be scared? Was I going to be a coward? Was I going to be scared of death? And when I went into combat, I wasn't. I was fine. I was okay with the fact that I could die, and I was okay with that. And I made good decisions and did what I was supposed to do. And the last one was I got married and had kids. Because all of a sudden, all these things, these being aggressive and working to fight and be able to destroy in an efficient way, well, then I took that and combined it with, okay, now I'm going to take care of my wife and my children, and that's what I'm going to do. And my point in giving this speech was he was a guy that had learned how to fight. He was a guy that had been in combat, and now there was one more step to take, which was, okay, now you're going to get married and take care interesting that once again, that dichotomy that you talk about, it fits perfectly into the way I figured things out as a guy that went to high school and joined the military. It's kind of crazy. It reinforces what you always say, which is that there's deeper meaning. There's a reason why I'm thinking that, and the reason is because of the things that you talk about, the way these things are overlaid throughout history for human beings to get to this point.
Yeah, well, you acted it out, which is what you're supposed to do, and it's better to act it out and to understand it. That's best. It's better to understand it and not act it out than to not understand it at all. But the best is to act it out and understand it, and because then you can, then the way that you represent the world and yourself is in accordance with the way that you act, and that's optimized.
Yeah, it's something that I was kind of acting out. No guidelines were like I was raised in the circus. Yeah, that was sort of my guidelines. And here's a good example. When I first got in the Philippines, there was no war going on. So what did a good SEAL do? You know what you did? You went out and drank and got in bar fights. Mm-hmm. That's what a good SEAL did. So you know what I did? Went out and drank, got in bar fights. That's what I'm supposed to do. It took me a while to figure out, but there's actually something more than that. Like, we're actually supposed to be prepared for war. And so now, like you said, I definitely acted things out and sort of was on a decent path, but as I got older and more mature, and to this day, as I can look around and actually overlay the understanding on the way I've carried out my life is very helpful to me. And it also helps me explain it to other people that see the path I'm on, where they like that path. They would like to join me on that path. And I get guys that, when I was in, I look like a serial killer for all practical purposes. That's the way I come across, right?
Not creepy enough.
There's guys that would, guys that would work for me or guys that would be around me, and they'd see me and they'd kind of latch on to the fact that I'm tough and aggressive. And some of those guys, they wouldn't catch the other part, which was that I was politically savvy and I was working and I was maneuvering and I was, figuring things out and talking to my boss in such a way that we could get where we need to be. And I was doing that whole other side. And so I get these guys that would end up not doing as well as they should do because they were just, hey, Jocko's just ultra aggressive and he gets after it, and so that's what I'm going to do, and I'll be in the same place. The guys that would do well, the guys that are like, Jocko's awesome and he's aggressive and he gets after it, he's also working and he's also maneuvering, and he's also massaging the egos of the people around him to make sure that they get positioned in the right spot where they can go to war in the right way. And so as I've gotten older, I've been able to tell people that more clearly, like, hey, it's not just about that side of the ultra aggressive. You got to be aggressive. You got to be willing to fight. You got to be willing to kill. You got to be willing to die. At the same time, you got to be able to temper all those things in such a way that they can be controlled and disciplined.
Well, I also think that that's part of what makes a world peaceful in the final analysis, because if you're around people who are dangerous but disciplined, then everyone watches their step, and that's exactly what should happen. Everybody should watch their step, and if there's no reason for that, then there's no sanction for poor behavior, for example.
Hey guys, it's Mike Chen. You know, it may not seem like it because I cover a lot of Asian food, but I've been wanting to go to Europe for the longest time. So I'm planning a trip to go back to Paris and then head to London for the first time, and then to Barcelona and Madrid. I'm so excited because I've never been to the UK, never been to Spain. I heard great things. I, of course, can't wait to try out all the food, and if you know me really well, you know I love castles, especially haunted ones. So my first stop in Europe is Paris, but I'm going to Paris via Singapore. Of course, that may seem strange because Singapore is not really on the way to Paris. That's because I just received a message from Singapore Airlines, and they're launching a brand new route from San Francisco all the way to Singapore. It's one of the longest flights in the world, and they're inviting me on the inaugural flight. Of all the years I've been reviewing first class, business class experience, this is the first time an airline invited me to actually go on a flight. And of course, a huge reason why I review these flights is because of the food. So when I get on this flight, I'm eating everything. How it's going to go is that I'm going to fly from New York to San Francisco, then get on the plane to Singapore, which is supposed to take almost 17 hours. But hey, that just gives me more time to eat everything. See you tomorrow. So here's the plan, and this is really cool. They're gonna allow me on the plane about 40 minutes before.
The peninsula faces a new threat: water shortage. Ukraine has cut off access to the Dnieper, and over the years, Crimea has seen its water supplies plummet. So much so that the major cities are now rationing supplies, with strict restrictions expected down the line. The situation is so bad that 2020 was deemed the driest year in Crimean history. The creeping drought affects agriculture, urban centers, as well as the operation of military assets in the peninsula. In this zero-sum game, Russia will do whatever it takes to secure its interests. So, if the 21st century will have water wars, it may as well start in Crimea. I'm your host Shivan, and welcome to Caspian Report. This episode is brought to you by NordVPN, an app that hides your IP and reduces your digital footprint. Whenever we do research on sensitive topics, censorship is something we come across all too often. Certain bits of information are hidden depending on the user's location. By using NordVPN, you can circumvent such surveillance techniques and gain access regardless. Visit nordvpn.com/CaspianReport to learn more and make use of the 30 days money-back guarantee. And if you like what you see, use the promo code CaspianReport to get a 2-year plan with a huge discount plus one additional month for free. The Crimean Peninsula is the grand prize in the Black Sea. It is the single most important region in terms of power projection. Whoever controls it will gain the ability to shape affairs far beyond national borders. It is therefore no surprise that Crimea was a point of fixation for the empires of the past. The Scythians, Greeks, Romans, Slavs, Mongols, Tatars, Turks, and Cossacks all laid claims to the peninsula at some point in history. Russia took control of it in 1783, and Crimea instantly became its gateway into the world economy. Control over Crimea secured a Russian Black Sea coastline and its territories in the Caucasus. It also restricted the flexibility of the Ottoman Empire and set in its decline. During the Soviet era, Crimea was transferred to Soviet Ukraine, and when the USSR collapsed, independent Ukraine inherited the left land. Still, Ukrainian sovereignty was a brief experience, lasting only from 1991 to 2014. Crimea was too valuable to be left outside of the Kremlin's authority. Russia wanted it back, even at risk provoking an economic and diplomatic backlash. So in 2014, Putin ordered the annexation of Crimea into the Russian Federation. That decision, however, was unlawful, and Crimea continues to be recognized as part of Ukraine by much of the international community. Having said that, and beyond the point of legality, there were unshakable geopolitical conditions that drew Russia to Crimea. Sevastopol, the largest city in Crimea, hosted not only a sizable Russian community, but the city was home to the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Navy. Without Sevastopol, Russia would be incapable of running overseas operations like in Syria, Libya, etc. Moreover, military facilities in and around Sevastopol granted the Russians indispensable area denial capacity. Much like the fortresses of old, modern anti-access area denial weapon systems prevent hostile forces from occupying or traversing the land, sea, or airspace in and around Crimea, protecting Russia's soft underbelly. Crimea was thus paramount for the defense of Russia's territorial integrity. These security considerations were, above all else, the primary motives in Russia's annexation. Now, 6 years after the act, things have turned out differently. Russia has had to govern Crimea and provide its 2 million inhabitants with all sorts of services and facilities. However, since the peninsula was not connected directly to the Russian mainland, the initial objective was to maintain the existing Ukrainian utilities such as power lines, energy pipelines, etc. Kiev thought otherwise and cut off the peninsula from its infrastructure. In response, the Russians laid new cables in the Sea of Azov and provided Crimea with new means of energy and communications. Additionally, a new bridge was constructed across the Kerch Strait, which provided road and rail traffic between the Russian mainland and the Crimean Peninsula. The newly constructed infrastructure was a testimony of Russia's commitment to Crimea. But there was one necessity the Russians could not provide, even after so many years: water. The local water sources of Crimea can only cover 15% of its demand. The remaining 85% was provided through the North Crimean Canal, which is on Ukrainian territory. The North Crimean Canal gets its water from the Dnieper River, and about 1 billion cubic meters of water was pumped into Crimea each year. The source of the Dnieper, meanwhile, is in the Smolensk region of Russia. So, in legal terms, the Dnieper is an international transborder river. Its length on Russian territory is almost 485 kilometers. Another 700 kilometers of the river passes through Belarus, while 1,095 kilometers of the river sits within Ukraine. Its watershed covers about 500,000 square kilometers, making it one of the major drainage basins of Europe. After Russia's annexation, Kiev halted the water flow. It was one of the few levers Ukraine had in its standoff with Russia. First, in 2014, Ukraine closed the sluices of the canal and built a dam using sandbags. 3 years later, the dam became permanent and was made of cement. Lawmakers from Moscow held numerous rounds of negotiations to convince their counterparts in Kiev to reopen the North Crimean Canal, claiming that the Ukrainian act was illegal and inhumane. But it's somewhat insincere for the Russians to talk about international law after having annexed the territory of another. Regardless, the Ukrainians did not budge, and this political stalemate set in a creeping drought in Crimea. As things stand now, Crimea depends on one thing to meet its freshwater needs: rainfall, an element that it cannot control. Due to climate change, however, rainfall in Crimea has been unusually low in recent years. The local reservoirs have been running at 1/3 since the start of last year, and 2020 marked the driest year since precipitation recording began some 150 years ago. The result of this drought has been profound. 2/3 of the peninsula faces a severe lack of water resources. The situation is particularly dire in the north and east of the peninsula, where people are migrating from the arid areas. Interestingly, Russia claims that the population of Crimea has nearly doubled to 4 million as of 2020, with much of the growth coming from Russian migrants. The increased human presence serves to bolster Russia's hold over Crimea, but it has also doubled the local quota for water resources. The newly constructed facilities and infrastructure and the Russian immigrants have stretched the local water supplies thinly. The water deficit has grown as much as the population has increased. Take agriculture as an example. During the heydays of the Soviet Union, about 400,000 hectares of Crimean land was being cultivated. By 2013, after years of reckless water management, cultivated lands have been reduced to 140,000 hectares. That number dropped to a mere 17,000 hectares in 2014 when Russia seized control of Crimea. Going by these numbers, Crimea's agricultural sector has shrunk by a factor of 8 since Russia's takeover, and a factor of 23 when compared to its peak output during the Soviet era. Clearly, Crimea has been steadily running out of water for decades, but Russia's annexation proved to be the turning point. As a result of the vanishing agriculture, local farmers have had to abort certain crops, such as rice and soybeans, which are water intensive. The Russian government calls it environmental adaptation, but it's a sign of decay, if nothing else. To reverse its fortunes, Moscow has developed a blueprint to secure Crimea's water security. The deadline is set for 2024. By then, Russia seeks to construct new dams, new desalination plants, and drill new wells to extract underground water. It also seeks to build new water pipelines to connect Crimea to the Don and Kuban rivers, and there's even a plan to employ aeroplanes to artificially increase rainfall, though this is not a sustainable solution. It's unclear what the total price tag is, but the Russian state has set aside at least $650 million for the blueprint. The trouble for Russia is that Crimea is considered part of Ukraine by the international community, and Russia's presence in the peninsula is deemed an illegal occupation. That means any project developed in Crimea can only be assigned to Russian companies. But the Russians do not have the best civil technologies. For instance, desalination technology is something the Russians never specialized in because water shortage was unheard of in Russia. Thus, constructing desalination plants would require international partners, but that would be difficult because no company would risk doing business in Crimea. This legal aspect of building Crimea's water infrastructure is one of the most significant drawbacks. Even so, should the plan fail to improve Crimea's water supply, the Russians could ultimately opt for more extreme measures. Depending on the severity of the water crisis, Russia could destroy the Ukrainian dams on the Dnieper River, blocking the flow of water. It could also decide to occupy additional territories along the North Crimean Canal in southern Ukraine. Such a military occupation would require the Russians to anchor by the banks of the Dnieper, some 60 kilometers north of Crimea. Neither of these military measures will be easy. Russia will only employ its military when other options have exhausted. Still, wars have been waged for much less, and geopolitics is the art of choosing between the disastrous and the unpalatable. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. All your likes and comments have been a huge encouragement for the growth of the channel, so please don't stop. Thank you for watching, and Saho.
Welcome to the Science of Success. Introducing your host, Matt Bodner.
Welcome to the Science of Success, the #1 evidence-based growth podcast on the internet. With more than 2 million downloads, listeners in over 100 countries, as part of the Self-Help for Smart People podcast network. In this episode, we show you the science of communication. Have you ever been afraid to speak or present? Are you afraid about not having the skills or tools to communicate your ideas to the world? We dig into the science and strategies of mastering skills like speaking and presenting, crushing the anxiety that often accompanies these high-stakes moments, and share evidence-based strategies for becoming a master communicator with our guest, Matt Abrahams. Do you need more time? Time to work? Time for thinking and reading? Time for the people in your life? Time to accomplish your goals? This was the #1 problem our listeners outlined, and we created a new video guide that you can get completely for free when you sign up and join our email list. It's called How You Can Create Time for the Things That Really Matter in Life. You can get it completely for free when you sign up and join the email list at successpodcast.com. You're also going to get exclusive content that's only available to our email subscribers. We recently pre-released an episode and an interview to our email subscribers a week before it went live to our broader audience, and it had tremendous implications because there was a limited offering there with only 50 available spots that got eaten up by the people who were on the email list first. With that same interview, we also offered an exclusive opportunity for people on our email list to engage one-on-one for over an hour with one of our guests in a live, exclusive interview just for email subscribers. There's some amazing stuff that's available only to email subscribers that's only going on if you subscribe and sign up to the email list. You can do that by going to successpodcast.com and signing up right on the homepage. Or if you're driving around right now, if you're out and about and you're on the go, you don't have time, just text the word SMARTER to the number 44222. That's SMARTER to the number 44222. In our previous episode, we discussed happiness. Can the pursuit of happiness backfire? Why are people more depressed and anxious than ever in a time when the world is physically safer and healthier than it's ever been in history? We looked at the crisis of meaning in our society and examined how we can cultivate real meaning in our lives beyond ourselves and move towards an existence of purpose with our guest, Emily Esfahani Smith. Now for our interview with Matt. Today, we have another exciting guest on the show, Matt Abrahams. Matt is a professor of strategic communication for Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. He's the co-founder of Bold Echo Communication Solutions and the author of the book Speaking Up Without Freaking Out. His videos and training techniques have been viewed tens of millions of times on TEDx and much more. Matt, welcome to the Science of Success.
Really happy to be here with you, Matt.
Well, we're super excited to have you on the show. Obviously, your name is great, and I think that you've got some really cool stuff to share with the audience that we can kind of dig into.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
So to start out with, I'm curious, and I think you shared this, it was in I think one of your TED Talks, that you kind of got into this whole world of how we can communicate with each other more effectively through sort of speech and debate when you were much younger in your life. I'd love to kind of hear that story and hear your involvement, because I was a debater for a number of years in high school, and so I always like to connect and sort of hear people's stories from being in speech and debate and that kind of thing.
Well, happy to share the story, although it's quite embarrassing. So I was a reluctant participant in speech and debate. As a high school freshman, my English teacher had us all stand up and introduce ourselves at the first day of class. And because my last name is Abrahams, I went first. And after I introduced myself, he came up and said, this talking thing seems to work for you. I need you to go to this speech tournament. And I had no idea what he was talking about. I had a week to put together a speech. He said, do it on something you're passionate about. And I was at the time, and still am, very passionate about martial arts. So I did a speech on karate. So I show up one cold Saturday morning in a suit that was too short and too tight. And I was so nervous to give this speech that I forgot to put on my special karate pants. Any of you who have done martial arts know that they're pants that have a little extra room so you can move around. And I started my presentation with a karate kick because I was told do something to get your audience's attention. And Matt, I'm sure you can tell where this is going. I ripped my pants doing this karate kick in the first 10 seconds of my 10-minute talk. And at that moment, I just learned the impact of anxiety on communication. And few people have singular moments in their life that set them on a trajectory, but upon reflection, that moment really set my passion for figuring out the role of confidence in speaking and what it means to come off as authentic and be a really engaging communicator. So speech and debate is something I continue doing after that moment, mostly to prove to myself that I could do it. But it definitely affected my entire life and career.
So I want to dig into this. I know you've got some incredible kind of strategies and tactics that you've sort of researched yourselves and uncovered in the science and the data. Before we get too deep down the rabbit hole, I'd love to kind of start with, the question that you sort of accidentally uncovered with your karate kick. How does
physically uncovered too? Yes.
That's right. Yeah, there you go. How does anxiety prevent us from being kind of the best communicators that we could be?
So I think there are two ways in which it affects us. First and foremost, if you have ever watched a nervous communicator communicate, you as an audience member feel nervous and uncomfortable yourself. And because of that, it prevents you from actually connecting and remembering and engaging with the speaker. So one form of impact is on the audience. The other form is that because of our increased self-awareness, because of the distraction of the physiological symptoms that result, it doesn't allow us to be our true selves, to be able to communicate fully and be completely involved and engaged. So both sides of that equation, its effects on us as well as its effects on our audience, really, really hamper us from sharing our ideas, telling our stories, and really being present with others.
I think it's really interesting that you kind of bring the component of the audience into this equation, because a lot of people, especially those who kind of fear speaking or don't have a lot of confidence in when they're giving even sort of small situations like presentations or meetings, etc., kind of focus solely on their own experience, when in reality it's sort of a two-way street. I know that's another sort of thing you talk about kind of deeper into this as well.
Yeah, so to me, a foundational tenet of all effective communication is being audience-centric. Your job is to be in service of the needs of your audience, be it a presentation audience, those in a meeting, or even in an interpersonal conversation. So my mind is always thinking about the impact of this stuff on the audience. And if and when you and I get into discussing techniques for managing anxiety, we'll talk about some things you can do to change your relationship with the audience so that it can help you feel more comfortable and confident when you present.
Well, let's come back to, before we dig into kind of some of the techniques and strategies, I want to talk about kind of where this anxiety is coming from and why so many people have, fear or get anxious around speaking and communicating across a kind of a myriad of circumstances throughout our lives.
Yeah, so I and other researchers fully believe that this is built in, it's hardwired. We see anxiety in communication across culture and typically across age range. So this is something that is ubiquitous and a part of the human condition. So that leads us to think that there's something biological in our evolutionary history. And I happen to affiliate with the camp that says really what's at stake whenever you communicate in a high stakes situation is your status. And I'm not talking about who drives the fanciest car or who gets the most likes on a post. What I'm talking about is from an evolutionary perspective, thousands of years ago, your relative status to others in the group associated with meant everything. It meant your access to resources, to food, to shelter, to reproduction. And anything you did that put your status at risk was literally life-threatening. And communicating in front of others can be very risky in terms of your status. So that is why I and other academics believe that we feel this anxiety that comes up in interpersonal situations, performance situations, testing situations. It's all from that risking of status.
It's funny, the very first episode that we ever did of Science of Success is called The Biological Limits of the Human Mind. And we talked about how evolution has, in many cases, kind of baked in these behaviors and shortcuts, which often work out really well and have a sort of a survival benefit, but in modern society can typically or frequently kind of short circuit in ways that we couldn't really predict or imagine.
And I think that's